Hey guys, what's up? This is Alex2K. Welcome back with another tutorial. And today we're talking about SSS. Not this SSS, because that's bad. Naughty boy. But we're actually talking about SSS. I don't know if you know what that means, but if you don't, let me tell you what it is. It means subsurface scattering. SSS. What does that mean? If we put it in simple terms, that would be translucency. Translucent. So that would be like how an object is kind of like transparent, or has a very little amount of transparency. Like for example, paper. That would be an example of translucent material. But the better examples are wax, for example, or marble, for example. That's also a translucent or a subsurface scattering material. How does subsurface scattering work? What it does is, suppose that this is a surface. When light comes and hits this surface, you have specularity, which is going to make this light bounce in that direction. You have transparency with refractions, that's going to make the light come through a different angle and exit. And then you have subsurface scattering, which what it does is that it actually makes this light bounce in all these directions inside of that surface, and then it comes out somewhere else. Another example, and probably the best example for me to explain that, is skin. Skin, if you ever look like at an ear, you'll see that the ear, I don't know, let's try and draw it here. You have like an ear and there's like a light source behind it, then sort of like this part of the ear is going to be kind of like reddish. It's going to be lighter toned than that area. It looks like a person now. Anyway, so that's subsurface scattering. I'm going to explain this starting with the simple method of translucency or subsurface scattering. It's more translucency rather than subsurface scattering, but it's pretty much the same principle, which is actually not with an SSS shader. Alright, so this is the simple example for you to understand the principle. I'm going to make a light here. I'm going to tell this light to cast shadows. And then I'm going to actually just soften up those shadows a little bit for pretty reasons. I'm just going to give it a radius, I don't know, of 10. And then I'm going to give it a lot of rays. Now I'm also going to make two primitives here. A polycylinder, like so, that's going to cast shadows, and a polyplane that's going to receive those shadows. Now if I make a render from this angle, what we're going to get is, we're going to get our, okay, that's a little bit too much. Let's give it a light radius of 2. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to put this a little bit further out so it really shines. There you go. So you see the object, you see the shadow that it casts, and you also see the angle of the spotlight. Now, because I'm picky, I'm actually going to change the penumbra angle of the spotlight so it looks a little prettier. There we go. So we got a softer type of lighting there. One of the stories, we got an object, and we have, well, one object that casts a shadow, and then another object that receives a shadow. Now, I'm going to give a couple of materials here just to keep it on the safe side. So I'm going to make sure that the cylinder has a material that, I don't know, I'm going to make it look green, and that the plane has a material, and I'm going to make that one look, I don't know, magenta. Don't you just love my color selections? Okay, so you get the point there. Now if I come here to the other side, and this is only direct lighting of course, because that object is not translucent, or the material is not translucent, then what you get here is just black. If you make the material transparent, that's not the same as translucency. That's just going to make that material transparent. So you will see behind it, but you probably would just see, like, you know, a little highlight there from that other object. You know, come here a little bit to the side. You know, you really can't see anything. There's a transparency, but you can't really. That's not the same as translucency. Translucency, again, is the effect of the light scattering through that object. So again, I'm going to make a render. It's going to be black. But if I change the settings, and here you have on the default settings, you have translucence, depth, and focus. If you increase the amount of translucence, automatically you will get that object to, you're seeing the shadow, you're seeing like the light, and you're seeing the shadow that's being cast. So you're kind of like seeing past it, or you're seeing whatever's behind. That is pretty much the effect of translucency. Now I'm going to keep it simple there, but you can always change the depth and the focus. So if I change the focus, then it's going to like really scatter. It's only going to scatter where the area of the light is. And if you can't tell, let me just delete a whole bunch of renders I have here. Okay, so I'm just going to make an IPR here. Interactive, theoretically photorealistic renders, which as you can see is not really too photorealistic. It just renders quick. It renders every change I make. But if I change this focus, see if you can actually see. Yeah, there you go. You can see how the light is focusing wherever the actual light is brighter, if you want to put it that way. So if you change that focus, you're going to get more scatter or less scatter. See, there we have less scatter. And the depth is just simulating the depth of the object, but because it's a polyplane, then you can barely see anything there. Unless I take it to like really low values, 0.01, 0.05, 0.089, 0.1, 0.12, 0.13. You can see how it's getting brighter, 0.14, 0.18. And then it's just like, that's it. That's as far as it's going to go. Then it's just the focus that will make it more or less. I usually don't play with the depth. I usually just play with the translucency and the focus in the case that I need this. But back to where I was, this is just to explain what we're going to talk about. Now this is El Cheapo way of doing things because it's not necessarily physically accurate. You know, if that was a light source, then theoretically that light should scatter all throughout that object, but it's not. And as far as like back scattering or anything like that, we don't have any of that. Alright, so simple example explains the principle. Now we're actually going to do it on something a little bit more complex, or in a little bit of a more complex term. I want to make a polyplane there, and I want to make a primitive. Yeah, let's say this guy. Can we do this guy? Let's see how that guy looks. Okay, let's do this guy. I like it. Looks cool. Now, of course, right now this has really sharp edges, so I'm just going to select some faces here so that it actually looks more waxy. And I am going to tell this under poly modeling tools. I'm going to extrude this, and like that. I got keep faces off so that I can actually do this extrude. And I'm going to smooth it. I'm going to smooth it one more time. One more time. There we go. So it's nice and smooth. It looks more, you know, waxy type. You know, with, like I was saying, you know, surface scattering is more to create that waxy feel or that skin feel or even marble-ish. Now what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna make myself a camera. I'm gonna look through that camera and gonna make sure that my light source is behind this object, like so. And I'm just gonna keep it like, let's say I like this view better, so I'm just gonna put this over here and make sure that that light is completely behind us, like that. Okay, so again, if and I'm actually also, let me switch back to my perspective. Now there's a light source completely behind the camera, and for the sake of explanation, I'm gonna put another light source in front. I'm just gonna add that one to a layer, and I'm not gonna have it visible until later. So right now it's only a backlight, and if we make a render in default settings with Mental Ray, then it's gonna be black. So let me just render this for a second from this angle. You can see a little bit of the light hitting that object behind. So I'm going to go ahead and render the camera 1. It should be black, like so. Now, you're going to make an SSS shader. You will be using Mental Ray. So you can either create all nodes or create Mental Ray nodes. And you can go all the way down into your Mental Ray shaders under materials. If you can't find them here, you can always go and say create render node, and then you can come here into Mental Ray and you'll find all the Mental Ray shaders. Now as far as SSS, it's actually got a whole bunch of options. SSS call, fast shader, passes, what else? Yeah, fast shader passes, fast shader X, fast simple. You can find the names here better. Call shader, fast shader X, fast shader X passes, fast simple Maya, fast skin Maya, physical, and set normal. Now, I know it's a lot, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to talk about a simple one. That's not actually the simple, because the simple is not quite so simple. It's actually a little bit more complex than the. Actually, I'm sorry, the fast shader is theoretically the simplest, but it's actually pretty complex. So I'm going to talk about the fast simple, which has the same principle as the skin Maya, so you can use both. But I'm going to use the fast simple one here. Now whenever you create a SSS shader, it's going to create a couple of things for you. It's going to make the shader itself, it's going to make a little texture, a Mental Ray texture, and it's going to make like a light map. This actually holds the shadow information so that it can transfer it into the shader itself. Now let's go ahead and assign this on there. And if you open up the attribute, just make a render just out of the bat and see what happens. Aside from it taking a long time to render. The reason why it's taking a little bit too long to render because the settings on my light. I'm actually going to change this light to something simpler. Or not necessarily simpler, actually I'm going to make a more complex light, but at least I'm going to get some lighting behind this object. It makes it more explanatory. I'll make a point light here. And I'm going to just put it just behind my object there. And for a second, under the shadows, I'm going to decrease the softness that I have and decrease the amount of rays so that this actually renders quick. Let's see how quick that is. Okay, light radius 1, shadow rays 10. Say light radius 0.2. So it's going to be sharp shadows, but it's going to render quicker. Okay. Now, off the bat, this is what you're going to get. So you can see my light source behind, and that's why I wanted to change it to a point, because you can see like this light source area behind this. You can see the shadows that it's casting, and you can see the object. Now, right off the bat, you can see subsurface scattering happening. The light is scattering through this object with a color. Now, if you go ahead and open the settings of the subsurface shader, you'll have a whole bunch of options here. Now, main ones that I want to focus on are the unscattered and the subsurface scattering layer. And we can also open the specular layer. Now, as far as the unscattered, you'll have ambient, overall color, diffuse, and diffuse weight. The diffuse is actually the light that would be hitting this object from in front. That's why I made that other light over there. Sorry, lights this object from the front. And just again, because it's going to take too long to render, I'm going to change the settings here to time shadow rays and 0.5. Now again, the diffuse is the light that's hitting this object from in front. So in the case of, let's say, that light showing up, then diffuse would be the light that's coming from here, hitting this object, and then having some diffuse around the object, but from the front type of lighting. Alright, now I don't want to talk about that one yet. I'd rather we work our way back to front, since that one's kind of like easier to explain. Then you have front subsurface scattering and back subsurface scattering. This is more about the light that's hitting it from behind. It has to do a little bit with the front, like the front one has to do a little bit with the diffuse lighting, and the back is going to be mainly just the back lighting. And it has some color values that you can see here, and that's the color of this. And all of them have, if you see, you have diffuse weight, you have front SSS weight, and back SSS weight. The idea behind the front and the back SSS weight is to try and keep them so that together they sum up to 1. 0.5 plus 0.5 equals 1. But that's not necessarily, it's just a guideline, it's not necessarily a rule. But one thing you can do is you can take like the front to 0, and this allows you to focus on the diffuse to 0, and this allows you to focus only on the back SSS. So if I made a render right now, then the only thing I'm going to see when it actually renders it, and making sure I hide my front light, let's hide that front light, all you're going to see is the back SSS. Now if we go ahead and change the color, I'm going to make it, I don't know, blue. Then you'll see that the subsurface scattering that's happening is all blue. Now you have the weight, as I mentioned. So if I made it 1, then that means the whole weight of the shading is going to be based on SSS, on back SSS. You have this thing called radius, and then you have depth. Now the thing is, for you to actually know what to punch in there, you have to know in Maya units what's the dimension of your object. So I'm just going to move it up a little bit. So you actually have to know what's distance from point A to point B to give you an estimate. So if I were to, for example, come here and I say create distance tool, I'm just going to snap to this vertex and then snap to that vertex. It's going to give me more or less an idea of a distance there. It's 2.26. I'm going to make this render again so that I can keep it. And if you change, let's say, the depth to that value, which is the overall depth of the object, so I'm going to make it 2.26. Then actually I'm going to make it a little bit less than that, 2.24. Right now the radius is really big, so the idea is that the radius is going to be like a smaller value, kind of like half of that, so I'm going to put that 1. So what you're going to see here is, I don't know if you can see it, hopefully you can, but you can see that this area, which is kind of like thicker in perspective, in distance, from the camera to the back, from here to like back there, that would be, that little area would be going through like a lot, it has a lot of thickness. It's almost the same number I punched in. So you can see that that is not really scattering, but the rest of the areas are scattering. Let's look through my camera here for a second. So if you were to change your back depth to 2, skip that image and render again, then that black area, that dark area just got bigger, because now it's like less thickness that's going through. And again, if you change the radius, let's say I'm going to make it 2, then the radius of the SSS is going to be sort of like bigger. So you can see how these areas are now lighter. See what I mean? So if that's like 10, then those areas are gonna, you might even light up the whole thing. Okay, there we go. You got even brighter. So that's the overall radius of the SSS, or how much it's going to like scatter. And the depth is just like the depth of your actual object. So if I made like 2.226, you can see how there's now more scattering on all those sides and less scattering right here. Right? So that pretty much takes care of that. Then you have the front SSS, and if I give this, I'm going to give this a 0.8, or I'm going to give it 0, and I'm going to give it 1 to the front SSS weight. So you'll see, okay, and the radius 2.26. You'll see that right now probably is going to be black, yeah, because that has to do with the front lighting. If I go ahead and show my front lighting, then give it a second. We're going to see how the light is scattering from front to back. If you want me to, I'll hide that back one. So I'm actually only showing the front one. So this would be the scattering from front to back, the front scattering. So if that radius was 1, let's say 0.5, it's got a lot of weight, and it's got a lot of direct lighting from the front, so we'll see how much it scatters. It's probably going to scatter a lot. There you go. You can see some diffuse, and you can see some of the scatter there. If you now combine those two, so let's say we give it very little front SSS weight. So let's just give it a little, make a render so you can see what happens. See how the whole object is going to turn, there's less front scattering. Now I'm going to give it a lot of back scattering. And you can see how it's sort of like mixing up, especially in that area. I'm going to make this color green. I'm going to decrease the radius and give it less weight and give more weight to the back to make it more pronounced. Oh, of course, there's no backlight, so let's give it some backlight. There we go. Now that the backlight's on, you'll see this is the front SSS scattering, and that's the back SSS scattering. If I give this a bigger radius, then we're going to get a little bit more green. Although it's got a very little amount of weight, but it might still spread out a little bit more from the front. Compare, let's see. Yeah, very little. You can barely tell. So let's give it more weight. I'm going to make this 0.8 and I'm going to make this 0.2. And I'm going to give it, it's not so intense on the back there. So there you go, see? So you have front scattering, which you can see here is green, and you got the back scattering, which you can see around the object is blue. And then the, sort of like the shift between one and the other. And then you have the diffuse weight, which is based on the diffuse color. That would be pretty much straight up diffuse lighting. So it would be like the actual amount of coloring that object would have. So as you can see, I put it to 1, so it's a lot. So I make it like 0.5, or yeah, 0.5. So it doesn't have so much diffuse influence. It has some scattering from the front, and it has a lot of scattering from the back. So it's going to be white and some green areas and some blue areas. You can see some of the green here. some of the blue over there. And you know, if I change my diffuse color to, I got green, I got blue, so I don't know, I'm gonna make it red or purple. Yeah, better. Because if I make it red, then they're gonna subtract with the blue. Right there is gonna mix up a little bit. There you go. And you know, again, you can decrease that intensity, increase that intensity, and decrease that radius probably. So you can see how it goes mix and matching. Now the overall color, to be honest, you don't want to play with it so much, but that would be the overall. It's like a multiplier to the whole thing. So it's going to be like an overall tone for this object. So you can see I made it darker, but I can make it, you know, overall redder, or overall bluer, or overall just, if I keep it white, then it's just whatever diffuse the front and the back is. So you can see how I pretty much lost most of my shading there, or my SSS shading. So you want to keep that, you know, you don't necessarily need to play with it so much. Now the ambient would give it some ambience, you know, so like if the object was incandescent, or you know, it was really lit, so it would become a little bit incandescent, then you can change that ambient value to increase the overall highlights of that. And then you have the specular color. So I'm going to keep that ambient at 0, and I'm going to increase my overall to white. Then you have the specular color. So of course, you know, really specular or not so specular. And then you have the shininess. You can think of this material kind of like a fong. So if I decrease this value, I'm going to get a bigger highlight, or like a blend. So you can see 2 is going to give me a softer and bigger highlight. If I make it not so intense, then it's kind of like going to be sharp in some areas, and then it's just going to get softer throughout. You can see how it's sharp there, and it just goes softening throughout. And if I make it really bright, then I'm going to get a lot of specular highlight. And that's pretty much it. You got the bump shader, so you can actually assign a bump to this. And one of the main things about subsurface scattering, I'm going to assign a Brownian here. One thing about subsurface scattering, now this has a lot of specular though. So let's see how it looks before I go ahead and talk about this. You still can get a feel for it. If you compare this bump right here with, I'm going to make, I don't know, a blend, which I'm going to assign to that object. I'm just going to take the reflectivity down. And to that blend, I'm going to assign the same bump. I'm going to make sure, yeah, there we go. I'm going to make that render again. This time it has a blend. If you compare the two, you can see particularly like the softness wherever it's like dark right now on the blend. With the subsurface, that gets the tone of the scattering. And another effect that this gives is that if you look at it overall, it gives you a sense of it being less bumpy, less intense. And that's just because sort of like the scattering. Just decrease this as a little bit more realistic. I mean, I had really high values. And this is going to look on the blend. And this is how that would look. Gonna keep that one here. And this is how that's going to look on the SSS. Now the rest is just playing with it and experimenting. Now, like I said, I have a lot of specularity, so you can't, you know, still you can see how in some areas it kind of like dims out. But that's pretty much what SSS does. The rest is really just playing with it. I kept this tutorial simple, but you know, with this you can do marvelous things. You can do awesome looking candles, you can do great looking skin, you can make awesome looking waxy objects. So it can bring a lot of realism to a scene if done correctly and tweaked correctly. And you always can read the My Help, and you can always look for tutorials online and all that stuff to get a little bit more of the detail information about the behavior of this. But that would be the very simple explanation of SSS. So I hope you enjoyed it and got to learn a little bit, and I'll see you next time. All right, I'll see you. Bye bye.